All right.
Sorry about that. We were having technical difficulties. Hopefully, we got it solved. We're here now, and that gives people a few minutes to show up anyway. So, hopefully, we have a little audience for this tonight. I'm Jeff. I'm here with Art Crowell, storyteller extraordinaire, who's going to treat us to the story of Iron John tonight. Iron John was when I was in the men's movement in the 90s, Robert Bly wrote a book called Iron John, where he breaks the story down and draws out some of the mythical elements as they relate to men's issues, men's work, that kind of stuff. But the story, as I understand it, is what, several thousand years older than that?
Robert Bly in his book wrote that he believed this. He traced it back 8,000 years, but believed that it could even still be older than that.
8,000?
Yes.
Gee, that's like older than Homer and the Bible and Gilgamesh. So, we're going to hear the story itself, not the Robert Bly commentary, and then after you tell the story, you're going to talk about feeding the story, and we're going to invite anyone in the audience that wants to help us feed the story with it, either through the comments or we're going to take live callers if you want to come on and chat with us about the story. So, is there anything you want to say about yourself first for those who may not know you?
Yeah. Again, name is Arthur Crowell. Been involved in men's work for well over a decade now in various facets. I've always been drawn to performing. Did a lot of theater when I was really young, and have really moved into the space of storytelling and have coupled the storytelling with a book that I wrote on the hero's journey and how to claim our purpose. And for me, storytelling is just a lost art, but it is so important to our hearts, our minds, and our souls. And the feeding of the story is not just something to be done after a story, it is a true interpersonal communication life skill that, once practiced, can be utilized in daily life when you're talking with somebody over coffee at a coffee house for better connection and understanding of interpersonal connections. And so, for me, storytelling is a very, very important aspect that I look to really spread as often and as far and wide as I possibly can.
Well, that is certainly needed at this time. So hopefully this can be a good example of that. Okay, Art, I'm going to turn over to you. I'm very excited about this. I think the Wild Man is much needed now, and not only in the men's movement, but in our time, our historical moment. So get us started, Iron John.
Iron John.
And I'm going to go off camera while you tell the story, and then I'll come back when it's over.
Sounds good. So I like to open the story with a little bit of music. And as I go into the playing of the music, I also invite the ancestors of the story to come and join us, walk with us, bring the story with us. I also invite each of us to have their faith come and walk alongside of them. I myself invite Jesus Christ to come and sit beside me as I tell the story. As we journey now into Iron John. Long ago, there was once a kingdom where lived the king and the queen, and they had nearby their castle a vast forest, acres and acres, leagues and leagues of this forest. And this forest was known for wild game in abundance. And the king would often send his hunters to collect game for royal feasts. Well, on this particular day, he had called one of his best hunters to go and fetch for him a deer. And so the hunter went with his dog into the woods, but something went awry, for the hunter did not return. And upon the next day, the king was very concerned and sent two more hunters out into the forest to search for the one who had gone missing. And when those two hunters also did not return, well, it was then that the king called forth all 100 of his hunters to go and commanded that they not return until the other three were found and brought back safely. Well, none of them returned. Not even the pack of hunting dogs that went with them returned from the forest. The king, out of concern for safety of his subjects and his kingdom, from that day forward, forbade anyone from entering the forest. And so the forest retreated into its stillness and its silence, and only occasionally, perhaps a hawk or an eagle was seen flying over the forest. Well, some time passed, and an adventurer from far off lands had heard of the forest that people had gone into and not returned. And this adventurer, he knew no fear, and this was just the kind of adventure that he was looking for. And when he came before the king and asked for permission to go into the forest, the king was very reluctant, for he did not want to see anyone else disappear in his lands. But the adventurer did assure him that he knew no fear, and this was what he lived for. And so it was that this brave adventurer went into the forest with his dog. And just outside the edge of the forest, his dog had caught a whiff of a scent of something. But they had gone not more than 3 steps into the forest when they came upon a pond of water. And as the adventurer began to creep closer, watching his dog at the edge of the shoreline, a naked hand came forth from the water and pulled down the dog under the water, and it was gone. The adventurer, realizing that he would need help with what he knew now he must do, went back to the castle, requested 3 of the king's best men to come with him and bring along buckets. And they went to the pond and they began bucket by bucket to bail out the water until at last they got all the way down to the ground. And there revealed was a large, hairy man, so hairy that the hair from his head curled all the way down around his ankles, touching the tips of his toes. Hair growing from his body almost as thick as fur. And he was all covered in rust. Well, they bound this man, this wild, wild man, and paraded him back to the castle. And as they went, the townsfolk and villagers came behind the procession as a parade formed behind the wild man being brought into the courtyard. And as the king and queen greeted the procession, the king knew, oh, this wild man could not be allowed to be free. And so the wild man was caged there in the courtyard for all to see, jeered at, spit upon, humiliated. And this was how the wild man lived for a time, until the newness, the novelty of it wore off. And he just spent days sitting in the cage with no company in an empty courtyard. Now, as it happens upon this day, A boy came into the courtyard, carrying with him a brilliant, shining golden ball, playing with it, tossing it high up into the air, catching it again and again. And one time, taking both hands, throwing it as high as he could up into the sky. The clouds should move just at that moment, and the brilliant sun gleaming into the boy's eyes blinded him for but a moment, and the ball bounced off the tip of his fingers, rolling into the cage of the wild man. The boy, very much afraid, trembling, crept as close as he dared, only close enough to barely be heard in his hushed whisper, "Might I have my golden ball back?" And the wild man answered, "Yes, but first, you must free me from this cage." The boy ran away, afraid. But the next day, wanting his golden ball, something terribly fierce, went back to the wild man and asked again, and again the wild man replied, "Yes, but you must let me out of my cage." "But even if I could, even if I was allowed, it is locked, and I do not know where the key is." "The key is underneath your mother's pillow." And the boy scurried away, again afraid. But that night he could not sleep, thinking forever of his golden ball. He decided to creep into his mother's and father's room, sneaking across to her pillow. As she slept in her deep sleep of dreams unawares, he slipped his hand beneath the pillow, grasping the iron of the key, and scurried hurriedly from the room. Out to the courtyard, where he went to the lock, inserting the rusty key into the rusty lock and struggling with all his might, for the lock was stuck and would not open. And as he struggled to turn it, it slipped and sliced his finger. Mingling with the slippery blood, he took both hands, and again with all his might. Eventually, click, the lock came open, and the wild man stepped from the cage and handed the golden ball to the boy and turned to leave out the courtyard. But the young boy called out for him, "Do not leave me, for they will beat me." The wild man turned, scooped up the boy, set him upon his shoulders, and with long, wild, hurried strides, the wild man left the castle, across the open grasslands, and to the edge of the forest. There he took the boy from his shoulders and set him down, and he spoke. "You will never see your mother or father again. But I will care for you. You may stay with me in the forest. If tomorrow you might pass a trial. But for now, come." And he led the boy to a nice, beautiful little glen. And there he set the boy down upon the most comfortable bed of moss, a nicer place than any feather bed that this boy had ever slept in. And that next morning, when the king and queen awoke to find their boy had gone missing and the cage of the wild man open, great mourning settled over the kingdom.
Thank
So
you.
now, you're welcome. What I like to do is a practice that's called feeding the story, as we mentioned. And at the very heart and essence of feeding the story, what it is simply sharing with all of those who have gathered here to listen to the story what came up for you. Were there any moments of the story that stood out? And just share any feelings or emotions that might be coming to you at this time. As the teller of the story, I like to wait until whoever is wanting to share has had an opportunity to, as I do not like to give forth what strikes me in the story, for I do not want to taint anybody else's experience. And so until the conversation is going robustly and others have shared, I like to sit back and hear what has come up for people.
Well, I was kind of thinking the same thing because I've shared a lot about this story. I never get tired of hearing it. It it's one that very much speaks to me, and I'm already out in the woods right now after hearing the story, which is where my soul longs to belong anyway. But I kind of want to hear from other people too before I rehash everything I've shared about it in the past as well. I'd like to get some fresh perspective. So what I did, if anybody's watching and they want to come on and talk and share and help feed the story, I put my email in the chat room. You can send me an email and I'll send you a link to come on the Zoom. Or you can just type in the comments, in the YouTube comments, if you want to share your reactions. However you want to do it. I can maybe start a little bit with what came up for me today while I was hearing it. I want to be out in the woods so bad. That's one of the reasons I did the training weekend. It was just a chance to go camping and to be out in the wilderness. I've told the story before of after losing my partner, how I ended up spending more and more time out in the desert. This was in Nevada, outside of Vegas, and how the wilderness was just being out there at night under the stars in the open air was one of the things that started the healing process for me. And ever since then, I've had to fight the urge to run off into the wilderness and try to prolong or recapture that experience. And to this day, I fight it. I live in the Pacific Northwest outside of Seattle. It's very civilized up here. And I just have that urge to step out of civilization now and then and get back in touch with nature and the wild. And when you describe the moss covered bed, that's all it took. Like, I'm in those woods. I do visualizations frequently where I have these entire forest scenes that I imagine to myself. I put on some ambient music and let my mind kind of wander around those scenes. I could do that for hours. It's very grounding. It relaxes me. It kind of puts me in touch with that part of myself. But to have that experience for real, like in real life, where you get all of your senses involved in it, that's something I've been feeling for a while. Emerald says, I want to be in the woods as well. Nature is my sanctuary. Nature is so healing. Yes, literally healing. Like from a mental health perspective, I don't know what my recovery path would have taken without the influence of nature and being out in the desert. Like that was such a significant factor in my post-traumatic growth and my ability to progress from the grief and kind of rejoin civilization and become functional again. There's also themes related to wildness and the wild man that I think are relevant societally in our culture, in the men's movement. So I want to maybe touch on those, but I'd rather hear from other people first. So if anybody wants to come on, just shoot me an email And okay, we have Paul who's asking to come on, so I'm going to send him the link. Okay, it's coming to you, Paul, and then we'll get another perspective on the story. And we'll get to see an example of feeding the story. Because you've talked about before how it has we tell ourselves stories, so we feed our own story and our reactions to like everyday events, and then we also how we react to other people and their stories. There's this interpersonal feeding of the story. So the more we can become aware of how we're feeding the stories and learn to feed the story in a way that promotes dialogue, I think has implications beyond just kind of personal growth. Okay, Paul, I sent you the link, so whenever you want to hop on, we're ready for you. And anyone else that wants to come on, just email me. It's primalhex@gmail.com, primalhex@gmail. We'd love to hear your reactions, your experiences, what the story meant to you, what it brought up for you, what the wild man provokes in you, what resonates, didn't resonate. Okay, here's Paul. Welcome, Paul. Hi, Paul. Welcome. Can you
Hey,
hear us?
I'm getting a feedback from the YouTube room. Let me mute that. There's like a delay or something.
Yeah,
All
I
right, you
have to.
hear me? Okay.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Morning. Well, good evening to you too.
Welcome.
Good morning for me. I'm checking in
Evening.
from Beijing.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to have the opportunity to feed the story. A few thoughts just on the part that we've discussed. You know, it was the forest. You're all talking about nature and all and so forth. It was a threatening place in the beginning part of the story. First, it was rich and abundant with wildlife and game and everything like that. But then there was this darkness that came upon it that was being caused by Iron John, by the wild man. I mean, first one man goes missing, then three men go missing. I mean, you find that in today's day and age, you're going to have a witch hunt. You know, you're going to have all kinds of, global attention that people start disappearing in a forest. You know, that's like Stephen King level stuff. So, and then a whole entire arsenal of men disappear, never to be seen before. So it's a pretty profound occurrence that's taking place. It sort of gets kind of glossed over in a sense. The king says, all right, nobody goes in there. That's it. And years and years and years go by until this adventurer shows up to uncover what it was. And he sort of does it. I have to throw some shine to the guy who does pitch meetings on YouTube. Maybe some of you have caught him before. But his token line is super easy, barely an inconvenience. The huntsman goes into the forest, boom, he finds the wild man like that. They drain the waters and boom, he's right there. He's like laying there. Hey, here I am. Whereas, go back a long time ago, none of the king's hunters could do that. So it's just kind of like a profoundness there. So I'll pause there and invite some discussions because, what I find is, and the forest can be both healing and renewing, but it also could be dangerous and dark and threatening. So there's both sides of that, the yin and the yang of it.
And the hero's journey formula of storytelling is a formula that's timeless. Every ancient story ever told has the threads and the elements of the hero's journey weaving through it. And even all the way into our very present moment, all of our films and movies and entertainment and TV that we gravitate to is built upon that hero's journey formula of storytelling that we're all drawn to and pulled to. And within that hero's journey formula, the forest is a very large element of the steps along the way. Many stories have that forest that the main character of the story has to confront or become lost in. And the forest always has some sort of a transformative quality to it along that journey. And that's something that I've always found very provocative as well about the stories and the metaphor of the forest. It's a very transformative place, both of beauty and of dark.
Hey, Stephen, welcome. And Cassie, if she's there. There she is. Hey, Cassie. Wow.
Steven's on mute. I don't know if he knows that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have some thoughts for us on the story?
I know. What was the question?
Just to share your thoughts or whatever came up for you
Sure.
during the story.
I do. I've been in men's.
Can you hear us? I think you.
I'm hearing an echo.
Is it your video, your YouTube video? You might have to mute it if it's still playing.
Oh, that's it. One moment.
And then you'll need to unmute the Zoom while I see you're back on mute for the Zoom call here.
I hate when that happens. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Happens to me all the time too. So.
I went that way. Yeah, Jeff. I first want to really give great thanks to Arthur for a great rendition of Iron John. I've been in men's work since for the last 18 years, and each time it takes me to a time and period of my life where I felt like the little boy lost in the woods and needing that strength of a wild man to come and get me, because I was a lost little boy and I needed the nurturing of someone stronger than me to help build me up. And each time I hear the story, it takes me back to a time that I was so vulnerable. And the key was underneath my mother's pillow to look at my upbringing and so forth. And so just well, I'll go into another story on another day, but I had some quite revealing news last Monday night, and someone from my past of 20 years came knocking on my doorstep that I'd long since had forgotten. And so that was a very healing moment for me. But anyway, the Iron John story takes me to a time and place where I felt vulnerable, isolated, alone, and I really relate to Jeff's comment about being in nature, because that's where I find my grounding too. And so my story is that the Iron John is so important and represents so many symbols or symbolism many things that transcend just sequence of events. It's the symbolism really impacts me. Here's Cassie.
So cute. Yeah, I had a very similar experience myself. The first time I ever read the book of Iron John, it really awakened a lot inside of me. And it took a handful of years of sitting with the material and then revisiting it much later to really be able to fully digest everything that's in there. And as with all stories, every time I tell a story, something new comes up. And every time I sit in a group like this and people feed the story, I get new perspectives. Somebody will see a symbol I haven't seen or somebody else hasn't seen before. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, because the symbols of the story, they're going to speak to each individual differently. As a storyteller, I firmly believe the greatest disservice that can be done to any story is this is the symbolism and this is the only symbolism and there is no other. It robs the story of its power and it takes away the experience of it from the individual. And also why I love the feeding of the story practice of just sharing what comes up for each person, because I get so much out of that. It's very enriching for me.
Paul brought up a good point for me in particular. When I first heard the story, one of the first things that struck me was the hunter goes in and it takes his dog, the pond takes his dog, and then they bucket out the pond and they find the man. And my first thought is, he took my dog. I'm pissed. Like I would be so pissed at this wild man because he took my dog. I know how important the attachment is between a man and his dog. And I lament to me there's like a lack of wild man lately, and I see I've always been a wild child and a wild boy. And so I miss having places where that's kind of celebrated or at least destigmatized. And so I always associate the wild man with something very positive. But Paul reminds me that he used the word dangerous. He used the word something threatening, maybe. But dangerous is especially the one that comes to mind. That for a lot of people, the wild man is associated with danger. It's not associated with freedom and authenticity and like personal, like a path to personal individuation, like it is with me. They associate it with danger. And it's not something you can force on people. You have to come to the wild man. You have to do the work to bucket out the pond and locate the wild man. So there is kind of an element of this isolation. He's in a remote place. You have to go find him. There's a dangerous element to him. And I tend to overlook all of that. And I just want to bring the wild man to everybody because I think it's going to improve groups and people, like personally and interpersonally. And I see the virtue in the wildness. But I tend to overlook the danger, not that it has for me, but that it could have for other people who are not me, and understanding that even though I'm able to use the wild man and draw on it for positive results in my life, that he doesn't have the same meaning or associations for everybody. So it's something to be aware of. I'm not sure what to do with it because I still want to bring the wild man back as much as I can. But I guess I do need to keep in mind that for some people, there's that dangerous element to it. Whether it's subjective or objective, because in the story, he was objectively dangerous. Like for some people, there may be a real, actual objective danger in getting in touch with their wild man in a way that maybe misapplies it. And maybe the wild man's not for everybody, too. So those are good things for me to keep in mind, to hear.
Jeff, am I coming in all right? I had connection issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I like that thread that you're on there. And what I find fascinating is one, why was he doing what he was doing? I mean, was he in fact killing these men, these dogs that were sent into the forest to hunt him? The label of wild man is not his own. He's given that label by those who captured him. And I find it fascinating that all throughout the story, the only person that's given a name is Iron John. No other character in the story has a name. There's the king, there's the prince, there's the princess, there's the gardener, so on and so on. But there's no one with a name except Iron John. And in a version that I read over, I found on Wiki, he introduces himself as Iron John. Now, he's got iron skin. He's got rusted skin. So he's taken on the iron part, because at one point he didn't have rusted skin. I mean, those of you listening who know the story, he was it was an enchantment placed upon him. You know, spoiler alert if you don't know, I guess. But at the end of the story, we learn he's king. Okay, but he was Iron John because there was an enchantment placed upon him. You know, and then why was he? The forest had existed for a long, long while. Why all of a sudden, out of the blue, is he doing this? He wants attention. He wants to be found. He wants to be caught. This one version that I just pulled up and I read before coming here today, it's this Grimm Stories website. And when he's first found, like, I think the way it wrote it was really interesting. Yeah, there was great astonishment over the wild man. The king, however, had him put in an iron cage in his courtyard and forbade door to be opened on pain of death. So there's that juxtaposition. There was great astonishment. Everyone was astonished. Wow. The king's like, however, hey, put him in a cage, lock his ass up. So, you know, there's interesting elements there going on. But then he allowed himself to be caught. What comes to mind is when the Joker allows himself to be caught by Jim Gordon. He wanted to be caught in the Joker film, the Chris Nolan film. So Iron John wanted to be caught because he made it so easy. He didn't put up any resistance. He didn't put up any fight. Yeah, okay, he took the guy's dog. I get it. But at the end of the day, they're draining the pond and he allows himself to be captured. You know, so I see into that. That comes up for me. You know, did he know that the fate that would befall him was to be locked into a cage? You know, what was he anticipating? And then the other element that I'll just toss in as a sideways, the key gets given to the queen. It's a fascinating event. Like the king's like, I'm gonna lock this labeled wild man. I'm gonna lock him up. And by the way, here you are, queen. You hold the key. Not his lead security guy or whatever they would call him in that time. Not a team of men who would keep it super safe. No, he hands it to his wife, who then recklessly leaves it under her pillow, who then her son comes and takes. So that's kind of what's coming up for me. I'll leave it there.
And there's some really beautiful elements in what you kind of brought up there, Paul, for me. One of the things that comes up for me, the wild man allowing himself to be caught, and you know, the fact that he is under an enchantment, and the relationship between the wild man and the boy is the very key plot line that runs throughout the whole story. And somewhere within all ancient tales, there's some sort of mentorship relationship that forms between the main hero, and it'll either be, you know, a person-to-person relationship like it is with the boy in Iron John, or it could be a spirit from the dead, from the spiritual realm, or from animals in nature, are three forms that the mentorship energy takes within a story. And so we have the wild man who ends up in the position of the mentor to the boy throughout the remainder of the story, as the boy has gone away with Iron John to the forest. And in part 2, we'll face a trial. And so that mentorship energy within a story is very, very key element as well within the hero's journey formula. And it repeats in every story. And all of these ancient stories in older cultures and older societies, we would have the elders of the community telling these stories to the youth, the adolescents, prior to initiation into adulthood. And the stories were primers as to what the hero's journey is and what it means to walk a hero's journey, which now is just relegated to entertainment of you can't, and it only happens in the movies. But in these stories, when they're being told to youth, it's to prime them for an initiation that's essentially a guided practice hero's journey to get the feel for it, that's led and supervised by the elders. And then they're welcomed into the adult community knowing how to go about their own hero's journey, which I like to phrase as our life's purpose, our dreams, what we are put here on this earth to do. And for me, the golden ball very much symbolizes the little boy playing with his hopes and dreams. And one of the symbols from Robert Bly's work that I really love is that, in our present culture, we lose our golden ball by 8 years old. And whatever shreds of it we might still hold on to in high school gets finished off by the world. And by the time we enter into adulthood, we've essentially been told we can't accomplish our dreams. We can't claim our purpose. It's as far from the truth as possible from my perspective. And from what I see the hero's journey as an actual roadmap as to how we can claim our purpose by working with these elements within the story. That these stories symbolize that spiritual, internal, human growth process of claiming the purpose that we were born to have. And that mentorship energy, that relationship between the Iron John and the boy is very, very powerful and very, very key element of the story.
Yeah, the call to adventure, it's a call, and it's an individual call. So it's not put out on a loudspeaker and the whole town hears it. Individuals hear it, and individuals have to choose to answer it, respond, step out onto the path or not. So I'm going back to the wild man being not being something you can bring to others, but something they have to be called to from within themselves. And about the key and the pillow and the mother's pillow, which is the queen, for a long time I used to associate that with, well, the wild man is that wild side of masculinity that women are constantly trying to tame and feel threatened by. So it's women that want the wild man in the cage. It's women that want control of that key because they want the ability to manage that male energy. But I'm realizing that men also fear their own wild man energy. It's not only like women are alienated from it, therefore they want to cage it and control it. I think it's the king that orders the caging. And I always thought maybe he did it on behalf of the wife. Like, had she not been there, would he have still had the wild man caged? And I'm realizing, yes, probably, because even within the male gender, there are men that cage their wild man. Like you said, we lose our golden ball at 8, high school, by adulthood. We are caging our own purposes and dreams as well. So this association with only women being the threat to the wild man energy, I'm having to revise and rethink and expand to include everybody potentially could be the jailer of that wild man energy.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because there's an element to the Iron John story, and one of the reasons why I chose it as kind of at the forefront of stories that I like to tell is somehow it ended up getting trapped within Iron John as a story for men and the wild man energy as energy for men, when this is a universal story for men and women and for all of us. In the story, it's called Wild Man Energy. It's the wild man, but there's other stories that are more feminine geared where there's wild woman energy. We have stories of Amazons who very much embody very much wild woman energy. And for Iron John to have unfortunately fallen into a realm of being a man's story for men's work, I think does a great disservice to the story, especially as we get into the next part and we see the relationship between the boy and the princess. There is phenomenal symbolism within those parts of just the male, female, and just human to human, falling in love connections, and that human connection and what it means to recognize the gold in each other. And I think a lot of that symbolism gets lost when a story gets separated out into a gender specific story. And so bringing Iron John more into a multi-gender audience, I think is very important, just for our world as a whole, because I feel as though the story kind of got a little bit of a disservice there and isn't able to reach its full potential in the world just because it did unfortunately get that stigma of being a man's story, despite Robert Bly's best intentions and overt attempts to say, no, that's not what's happening here. I just used it because it's a really great story. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it's a very important point for the story specifically.
I think men saw, or still do. I know I do. They see a lot of themselves in it, and of course, stories are universal, so they're not limited to any. But I know in the '90s when I was part of the men's movement, it was about getting in touch with your wild man, recapturing, reclaiming that wild man, particularly for men. I can't speak to what was going on in the women's movement, and now it seems like there's been a shift. And it's all about not getting in touch with your wild man, like suppressing your wild man, like toxic masculinity, and making yourself safe for everybody else. And the wild man, I think, gets lost or sacrificed in that process. So it's almost a reverse from the '90s. And even though lip service is paid to the wild man, the actual wild man in practice, I see very little of. I see very little space where the wild man would, other than a cage that's created, where the wild man would feel welcomed or want to dwell. So I think there is still room for men, at least in men's work and men's movement, to remember and stay in touch with that wild man energy. I think he has it more than many. I think it's the pendulum's like swung too far in the other direction. So more than any other time, I think now is the time for the wild man to restore some of that balance. I lost the track of what I was trying to say, but I think the wild man does still have relevance to men. Not to say there's not additional relevance to everyone else as well, but I notice particularly in the men's circles that I'm a part of, that there is, I think the wild man could do something to bring a balance that I feel has been lost over the last few decades.
Yeah, well, Arthur, I don't know, Jeff, what time is allotted for your call today. Arthur had spoken about wanting to sort of upend the way wild man is being portrayed, at least put another spin on it. And I don't know if he's planning to do that today or in another the 2 consecutive calls that are coming up. But you were sort of giving a little bit of a tease to that, Jeff, with what you were just saying, like re-envisioning the wild man, or a different interpretation of the wild man than what is being portrayed today. especially in the men's movement, maybe.
I'll go ahead and jump on that since you
Yeah.
invited that in there, Paul. Thank you.
There's nothing more wild than upending the wild man. So
Yeah.
take it.
Well, I wasn't letting you off the hook, Arthur. I just was waiting for when you were going to throw it in there.
Well, and actually it's perfect because I was about to jump in anyway, so it's great opening. No, the wild man I call it the wild man energy, and I've come across just a lot of circles and places throughout my travels where the wild man is referred to an archetype. And for me, this actually becomes a very dangerous distinction. I feel is actually very important when the wild man, as Paul, you mentioned, Iron John was put under an enchantment so that he became stuck as the wild man. But he's actually a very powerful baronial king and still has access to all of the silver and gold, as he will mention in the story segments to come. The wild man, he is then freed from his enchantment once he has finished mentoring the boy, and the boy has reached the culmination of his journey at the end of the story. That's when he is freed from his enchantment. And so when we look at the 4 core archetypes of the men's movement now, the lover, magician, warrior, king, looking at the direct symbolism of the story of Iron John, the way that speaks to me is the wild man is an aspect of the sovereign, of the king archetype. And even in the story, the first king that we encounter is caging the wild man. And so he's trying to be a king that rules without his wild man energy. Whereas Iron John is a king that fell under an enchantment and was stuck in nothing but his wild man energy. And so to separate the wild man from the king, I feel as though it is splitting a true archetype into 2 half characters, and both archetypes then would become very diminished. And that's where I see, to me, that feels very dangerous, because now I am looking at the wild man as a complete character that is absent of the tempering energy of the ruling sovereign that is looking out for all of his kingdom, his family, his immediate world, his community. And likewise, if I am the king separated from my wild man energy, when it comes time to really pull deep from within, when darkness descends, when challenges in our life come in, and we have to tap into something really strong, really feral, in order to push through these challenges to ultimately be transformed, which is the heart of the hero's journey. We leave our home, we encounter great darkness, we become lost in a forest. These forces transform us. We find mentorship energy. We end up getting gifts that allow us to exceed on the pathway. If we're missing that wild man energy, we don't ultimately succeed in the journey. And so the wild man energy becomes extremely important, but then it's also something that our current culture, of course, would very definitely fear, because the hero's journey is relegated to a space of entertainment. All my life growing up, I received messages of, all these great accomplishments and dreams you see these actors in the movies accomplishing. Well, that only happens in the movies. Or if it's a true story, well, they just won the lottery. It only happens to the few. Not everybody can do that. And that message to me is completely against what the hero's journey is actually telling us. It's not telling us it's easy. It's definitely a lot of challenges, and I have a lot of resistance to my own hero's journey. I fight it daily. Even being here now, there's lots of resistance that comes up to potentially share or speak at different things. But that distinction of wild man and sovereign as 2 separate archetypes versus the wild man being an energy of one of the archetypes to me is a very important distinction that I feel the story of Iron John is trying to tell us within its symbology. Again, that's what comes up for me. And, there are a lot of other people that identifying the wild man energy as an archetype is what allows them to embody it, to step into it, and to push through those challenges, to beat addiction, to confront their shadows. So it's a tool that I would never want to see somebody not utilize. It's just in the greater discussion of it, keeping that conscious awareness that, the wild man is an aspect, I think really leads to a greater self-awareness at the end of the journey for me.
Yeah, well said. I mean, in the end, we know that the wild man was the king all along.
Yeah. It's king energy.
Yeah, so that's a good
I think
point, Arthur.
our
I'm glad you
a
brought
lot
it
of
up.
our current. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
No, please, Jeff, go ahead.
No, go ahead. And then
I'm
I
just
think
glad the
Steve
chance
might have wanted to jump
presented
in.
itself. But yeah, Stephen, he's been a little silent over there.
Well, I'm not educated enough to talk about the Iron John story at the level you guys appear to be. I don't have any previous knowledge other than what I learned in my men's work 18 years ago. I think the purpose for me of the Iron John story was an introduction to men's work. And Iron John represents to me, for the abuses and so on and so forth, was inspiring for me to ask for what I need and reach out and in the process help someone else, the little boy in this case, and have the courage and the energy to stand up for myself. And so that begins a journey of men's work. And of course, there's a lot of nuances and so forth, but it began my journey of piquing my interest to learn more. What was it about the story that touched me so? And I asked myself that, and it's because I was abused. And so I found inspiring energy from the wild man asking for what he needs and then helping the little boy walk into the forest. And I was that little boy that needed that help from the wild man to find that energy to stand up and ask for what I needed. And so, like I said, I don't have the understanding that you gentlemen seem to have, but that's what it means to me.
And I love that. That is really, really beautiful. That is far more pure to me because I've sat with the story for so long. I've told it many times. I've talked it and debated it. This is why I love storytelling and I love feeding of the story, because that perspective that you just shared with us is very, very beautiful. It's what the story gave to you. And that's what storytelling to me is all about, is I tell the story and it has an impact to you that you just shared, changed your life. It brought you into men's work. It allowed you to continue to grow. And that is the power of story and storytelling. And when we come together in a community and we share that, I learned from you here on this call, and it's a sharing of experience. And the barrier I feel our society sometimes puts on, I'm not educated enough, or I have to go to a more educated person. Storytelling and feeding the story, it equalizes the playing field of my human experience to your human experience. And we get to sit and talk about it on equal ground. And that's why I feel feeding the story is such a powerful interpersonal communication tool and skill, to be able to meet you and share this experience has been very rewarding and fulfilling for me. And so I thank you very much for sharing that. It's very important to me. So thank you.
I want to second Arthur on that, Stephen. I mean, I'll also reveal this, and If I sound educated, I'm just making it up really well. But thank you for the compliment nonetheless. But I love what you just said, the ask for what I need part. Because in the ensuing versions of the story that Arthur's going to share, there's a lot of that, asking for what I need. And even when the boy asks the wild man to take him, he asks for what he needs. He needs to be taken away from the threat that he may receive by having released the wild man. Of course, it was a foolish child's threat because his parents would have never killed him, but that's just fascinating. That, yeah, even in that moment, take me, please. Did he even know what he was asking? To be, not that I want to throw any darkness, but to be kidnapped in a way, because that's how all of the kingdom saw it. The prince was kidnapped by the wild man, so, but ask for what I need. That's beautiful, Stephen. Thank you.
Art, I like your dialectic of wild man, king energy. I think that's the part that was missing in my own perspective. I see a lot of kings, current kings, leaders, that seem to be missing that wild man aspect. And so, like, we need the king in his fullness, in his wholeness. But then I myself have the wild man aspect, and I think I'm trying to find that king aspect because I don't think it's as developed as the current kings are. So finding both, like getting access to the entire range, I think is the archetype that the wild man and the king are aspects of. I'm still going to look for the kings with the wild man aspect developed, because those are the ones that are going to have credibility for me. But I need to also find a way to bring in my king to develop the wild man, my wild man aspect. And I guess that goes back to mentorship and becoming an elder and all of that. That's exactly the path that I'm on. So you've given me, I think, a better way to look at it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I know I've had a fair amount of time to speak, but I'll throw in one part from Carol Pearson, The Heroes Within. There's different levels to each archetype. And there's the shadow level, which of course is the darkest level of undeveloped archetype. And as king and wild man could essentially be in that shadow if not properly harnessed and properly handled. Like you said, Jeff, a lot of kings without their wild man energy. In a lot of respects, there's been a great deal of neutering
Yes.
the wild man in the king. And Hollywood's doing a phenomenal job of that. Just case in point would be the new Barbie film, which I read an article that Chinese men were walking out of the theater appalled at the emasculating elements that were showing up in that film. I've yet to see it. I don't know if I will. But in large respects, maybe because that wild man energy showed up too much in the shadow, in the dark energy, not in the higher levels. Because there's wild man, there's king at level 1, level 2, level 3. There's wild man, level 1, level 2, level 3. So a wild man in the darker levels is threatening, is misogynistic, is any number of other labels, toxic masculinity. All of this is that wild man that's not honed well and curated well, if you will. Just because it's called wild man doesn't mean it needs to go around breaking shit. That's just, I'll leave it there.
Ragnar Lothbrok, Vikings. That is a ruling king whose wild man energy is very high. At times in his story, out of control. At times he struggled to bring it a little bit more into balance. But as a whole, and it's me casting a judgment, but I look at the character of Ragnar Lothbrok, and that's a sovereign ruling from a very wild man, shadowy side of that wild man energy. It's wild man energy out of balance. And there's other stories throughout time where you have that wild man energy out of balance. Gilgamesh, the first written recorded story that we have, is a hero who is completely out of control, and his subjects are praying to the gods to get this king under control because he is abusing his subjects. And in that story, it's through friendship. The gods create a friend that is of equal physical prowess that can match him to catch his attention. And then once they've matched and locked physical horns and have a mutual physical wild man clash respect for each other, then Gilgamesh is looking to Enkidu, his friend, as they travel to defeat the giant for dream interpretations and character growth. And so his wild man energy is a sovereign, is getting balanced. And it's a great story that shows that balance of energies.
Yeah, I think it's the balance. I think the curation part comes from the king aspect. And so you have to have both kind of working together. And I think there's a shadow side to too much king energy as well without Wildman. You get this stifling kind of stasis, hollowness, empty ritual, ceremony. And so I think the wild man is essential because that's what the king is able to work on and develop. So king without wild man is just empty authoritarianism or even totalitarianism. But wild man without king is what you just described. So I think you need to draw on the king aspect to manage and direct the wild man energy. And I think both sides of the archetype have their shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Well, any last closing remarks, comments, thoughts, feelings?
Just say gratitude to you two gentlemen, Jeff and Arthur, for making this happen today. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank y'all for showing up and participating. I think it went well. We're going to do it again the next 2 weeks. So I'm eager to see what comes up.
Part 2 and part 3. Looking forward to it.
Me too.
Same here.
Is there anything that you want to promote, any of you really, that you want to promote that coming up? Or I know you have your book, your website.
Yeah, basically, I've written a book called Finding Our Golden Ball, A Hero's Journey Roadmap. And it's geared towards really just that, a roadmap on how to find our purpose, how to answer the call to our purpose, how to confront and move through and allow ourselves to be transformed by the external darkness, our internal resistance, in order to get to finding that mentor energy and receiving the gifts that allow us to succeed on our hero's journey, and to ultimately create a heroic mission statement that, I adopted for myself as a battle cry that really is, this is what I am doing that keeps me grounded to my purpose. And so that's what this first book that I've written is geared towards. And it's a self-guided journal if you want to just purchase the book as a self-guided journal. But the website is also a place where we're building a community of support. There's a forum with discussion groups and a place for people to come where we support each other's heroes' journeys. Your dreams matter there. And also we run groups where a lot of what we just did here tonight, we tell a part of the story and we talk about what comes up for us, under the context of finding our purpose, following our dreams. And so those groups, there's a couple of group slots that are open for registration, and joining the community discussion boards is completely free. So I wanted a place where anybody could come to be able to participate in discussions and be supported. And the website is hjroadmap.com. And again, the book is Finding Our Golden Ball, which can be found on lulu.com.
And I'll put your link in the description too. So at the bottom of the video, you can find Art's link. I also have a group every Monday. It's a free men's group it's open to all men. It's at 6 p.m. Central Time. You can email me for the link, same email, primalhex, primalhex @gmail.com. Paul or Stephen, anything you want to share or close with?
No, I'm complete. I do want to throw some gratitude to Stephen for coming on video, not just being me coming here on video. I'm grateful for that, and the part that you shared. Once again, thank you for that. Really, it was true gold. True gold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Ni hao ma. That's Chinese, I believe. And I see.
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
I said ni hao ma.
Yeah. Ni hao ma. Say Zaijian. We'll be saying goodbye soon. So there's your goodbye. Zaijian.
See.
Yeah.
I have some friends in China and also Japan.
Sweet.
Anyway, that's beside the point. Gentlemen, I enjoyed. And Jeff, thank you for putting this on. It allowed me to sample some information that I hadn't before considered or had before. So I appreciate the intellectual conversation.
It was good to see you. I'm glad you showed up. And Cassie, too. Paul, it's great to meet you. We'll be here next week doing the same thing. Art, thank you again. And I guess with that, until next week.
Okay. Blessings, gentlemen. Be well.
Blessings.
And all of those of you in the YouTube chat room, blessings to you as well.
We'll see you all next week.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you again. Take care.